What is going on, guys? We're back with more picks and predictions. This weekend, the UFC goes to Abu Dhabi for probably the best fight night of the year so far. We got Robert Whittaker and Renier de Ridder headlining this fight night card. We went 9 for 14 at UFC 318 last week. Not terrible considering, all the upsets that happened on the main card. The only pick that I went a little bit astray on was the Nicole Cagliari pick. She was plus 200 to kick off the prelims. She ended up losing that fight. Carly Judas was probably the safer option there. Outside of that, the other picks that kind of lost, some pretty big upsets. Kevin Holland's ass, should never really be picking him to begin with. But yeah, went 9 for 14. Not terrible. Did pretty good in comparison to a bunch of other channels. And let's jump right into the picks and predictions for every single matchup at the UFC Abu Dhabi Fight Night card. Kicking it off, we got a low-level heavyweight matchup in Martin Buday versus Marcus Buchecha. And Marcus Buchecha, 5-1, making his UFC debut here. He is a fairly one-dimensional fighter, though. He is going to grapple at a really high level. His jiu-jitsu is definitely leaps and bounds above a lot of the fighters in the heavyweight division. So if you do see Marcus Buchecha, get a fighter to the ground in a fight, he's going to do good work, especially in the UFC heavyweight division with the way the fighters are nowadays. And then Martin Buday, Martin Buday, 15-2, just gets wins in the UFC, but just always looks very, very unimpressive in his wins. Loves to lean up against the cage, on his opponent, make his opponent carry his weight, just tiring him out. Sloppy striking, and in this matchup he'll probably be the better striker just because of all the work he's done throughout his career. And Marcus Buchecha primarily being a jiu-jitsu fighter. But here's the thing, right? Buchecha in this matchup and the way he fights, he's going to tirelessly look for takedowns, and he's not a fighter that has like crazy wrestling. So for him to get a takedown, it's going to be a lot of trips, getting in the clinch, a lot of chain wrestling, chain takedown attempts. That's what he's going to be doing to get takedowns against Buday here. And what that will do is negate Buday's regular lean up on your opponent up against the fence, just kind of move forward. I think Marcus is going to shoot a bunch of takedowns to get Buday moving backwards. Buday is going to want to be open in the striking in this fight. And I think that hesitancy from Buday is what's going to lead to him losing this fight, because he's going to be more scared to come forward because Marcus is going to close the distance. He is going to shoot. I mean, that's going to be his only path to victory in majority of fights. That's going to be where he is comfortable in matchups. So I see Marcus, moving forward, trying to get that shot, trying to get Buday to get to the ground. And in that process, Buday is going to be striking moving backwards, which is something that he's not good at all. And then in that scenario, I do see Marcus eventually getting Buday down. You're going to see Buday has a 100% takedown defense in the UFC, but he hasn't really fought anyone serious that's going to take him down. Maybe Shamil, the GOAT Gaziv, but Shamil Gaziv knocks him out early in the second round. And yeah, just in general, I mean, Martin Buday, I do think eventually he does get taken down by Marcus here. I think Marcus subs him up. I see that's the way the fight going. I think maybe Marcus even subs him up in the first round. So I think this fight ends early. I think he gets subbed up, Martin Buday, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight on the card, we got Mohammad Yahya versus Stephen Nguyen. And I think the way you pronounce it is actually Stephen Nguyen. So I'm going to say Stephen Nguyen versus Mohammad Yahya. And, this is a pretty interesting matchup. I mean, Mohammad Yahya is just kind of trash, in my opinion. He does have the home court advantage here. His nickname is the UAE Warrior, fighting in the UAE from Dubai in this fight. So he's going to have home court advantage here. And, judges can be really weird in this part of the world, in a lot of different circumstances. So that is something to note. And, I would kind of use that to say that if this fight does go the distance, I would be afraid if things are kind of close. I'm sure they would lean it the Mohammad Yahya way to give it, to the home crowd. But Stephen Nguyen, man, he's just going to be the better fighter here. And to be honest, I don't see this going all the way. Mohammad Yahya's chin has been checked before. Stephen Nguyen's going to be throwing more volume here. He's the better striker. I think he's the overall better fighter. Maybe if Yahya wants to mix in some sort of takedowns, or you see some leaps and bounds, in his game from his last fight. But unless he comes in looking like a much further improved fighter than he was in his last bout against Cowie Fernandez, which was a year ago. So potentially there are some improvements maybe that we're not noticing. But in general, I think that Stephen Nguyen going to land more often. He's going to land hard. And I think he knocks Mohammad Yahya out. So I see a couple finishes to kick off this card this weekend. And let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Ibo Aslan versus Billy Elekana. And Ibo Aslan, man, he is a really fun fighter to watch. He does like to, just come out all offense, be very aggressive, and just absolutely unload on his opponent. And he's fighting Billy Elekana this weekend, who I think is not going to like being on the back foot against someone like Ibo Aslan. Someone like Ibo Aslan is never going to let you just kind of walk him down. He's going to walk forward. He's going to make it, a pretty big dog fight. And I think that he ends up sleeping Billy Elekana here. Pretty simple. I'm not going to break Ibo Aslan down super technically as a fighter. I think that Billy Elekana never been knocked out, but, never fought Ibo Aslan. I think that Ibo Aslan comes in here just kind of moves forward a lot, doesn't let Billy Elekana fight a pretty fight. I think in a pretty kickboxing fight, Billy Elekana does beat Ibo Aslan, but Ibo Aslan's just not going to let that happen. So I see him coming forward. I see him applying a lot of pressure to Billy Elekana, and I think it's a classic Ibo Aslan early knockout performance. Get some hype back on the last Ottoman, and let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Amanda Ribas versus Tabatha Ricci, and I'm going to go with the underdog here in Tabatha Ricci. I just think Amanda Ribas, she's gotten a little bit accustomed to losing at this point in her career. She's coming off 2 straight losses to Rose Namajunas and Mackenzie Dern, and obviously these are really high-level fighters. But the thing about Amanda Ribas is that, I don't really see that much danger coming from her end, and I think that, obviously this fight is going to probably be a lock to go the distance. And when it comes to, winning decisions with Amanda Ribas, I mean, she is gritty. She will move forward. But I think Tabatha Ricci is just going to be in the right position to just throw more volume and make this look a little bit better on the feet. Similar to her decision win against Angela Hill. I think Angela Hill is actually a pretty tough fighter to just purely go out there and out-volume, out-strike. And she was able to do that to Angela Hill. And I think she does that to Amanda Ribas here. I think that both these girls could probably grapple at a very equivalent level. We know that, Tabatha Ricci, now dating a boxer, she's going to kind of be sharpening her skills on the feet, and I just like the amount of volume she throws. If you go look at the stats for this, you'll see that Amanda Ribas actually lands just slightly more than Tabatha Ricci from a volume perspective, but I don't even think it's going to be about how you're landing punches. I actually think it's going to come down to how many punches you're even throwing, because I think that, they're going to keep landing. They're going to land punches that have, no real significant power to end the fight. And I just think that Tabatha Ricci is going to stay in her face, throw more. I really liked how she did that with Angela Hill, and I think that she can come out here and do that with Amanda Ribas as well. As an underdog, I think this is a pretty good spot. I mean, in general, in women's MMA, picking the underdog is never really a bad idea. Like I said, I picked Nicole Cagliari last week. She ended up losing, but didn't place a bet on it there. I just think that as like an underdog spot here, I know that this fight's not going to end in a finish. I think that it's going to go all the way, and I think that Tabatha Ricci, even if she doesn't land much or land with anything of significance, I think she'll throw a lot. I think the optics is something she's going to make look good, and in very close rounds, which is what I'm seeing, I think they're going to lean Tabatha Ricci here. So maybe people will be crying robbery here. Maybe that would be the case, and Amanda Ribas slightly more proven, but I just think that right now, at this point in Amanda Ribas' career, even though she's not that old, I just think that Tabatha Ricci is going to come out here with a little bit more fire, a little bit more power, and, just a little bit more activity to beat her. So I'm going with Tabatha Ricci. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next up, we got Damon Blackshear versus Davey Grant. And I'm going to go with another underdog here. I'm going to go with Davey Grant to beat Damon Blackshear. I think he does it, by decision, but if he knocks Damon Blackshear out, I wouldn't be crazy surprised. Damon Blackshear obviously has been knocked out once in his career by Montel Jackson really early in the fight. I think Montel Jackson knocked him out in less than 20 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. Davey Grant, 14-7, you're always going to catch Davey Grant at underdog odds. And, I actually really love that. Davey Grant, super gritty fighter. He's always going to fight for your money. He's going to be someone that's, you're not going to regret betting on Davey Grant, especially at plus money. And in this fight, there's one clear advantage for Damon Blackshear, clearly, and that is through the grappling. But Damon Blackshear has proven to, let fights get closer than they are. Has not really proven to be worth his price tag in a lot of these fights that he's getting into, especially in that last fight against Alatang Heli. He was a minus 550 favorite going to that fight, and he did get it done, but it was a unanimous decision. He just didn't have as impressive of a performance as I would like a Damon Blackshear to have. His most impressive performance was probably his loss to Mario Bautista that a lot of people did claim robbery, that he did beat Mario Bautista, and I had a bet on Mario Bautista in that matchup. And, I thought that Damon Blackshear could have easily pulled it off. Damon Blackshear got the decision there. I wouldn't be calling robbery. And to be honest, I was a little bit surprised when they did give it towards Mario Bautista, but he seems to have the judges in his pocket. That being said, Damon Blackshear, I think that's his most impressive performance. And then Davey Grant, I just think that, Davey Grant's going to be gritty. If Davey Grant can stop these takedowns, which, early on in his career, he was getting subbed a lot, and that is definitely something that is a little bit of a hole in his game, but he seemed to be improving on that end. He's 39 years old. He's made, enough leaps into his game where now that I think that against Damon Blackshear, if he can just keep the fight standing, I think he can out-grit Damon Blackshear on the feet. So I can see him, defending takedowns, taking this to a 3-round decision and getting it done. I can also potentially see him landing something big and knocking Blackshear out. So I'm going to go with Davey Grant here. I don't know why. I like him as an underdog. And let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Muslim Salikhov versus Carlos Leal. And I'm going to keep this one pretty quick, pretty short. Carlos Leal, pretty big favorite in this fight. And, I wouldn't say he's worth the money, but it's hard to kind of pick against him here. He's minus 470. definitely not going to be playing that line. And just in general, I think that, he's just like a roided up dude. Had a pretty impressive UFC debut against Renat Fakhretdinov where he got robbed of that decision. And that was also in the UAE. So interesting. He's coming back here to perform once again against a Muslim Salikhov who is really good, who is very well rounded, who can, beat you up on the feet, get you to the ground. Coming off, 2 straight wins now against Santiago Ponzinibbio and then knocking out Song Kanan. So he's kind of putting it together as well. I mean, he's 41 years old though, and that's going to be the main thing here. He's been in the UFC for a while. This is going to be like kind of near the end of his run. Carlos Leal, he's 31 years old. He's going to have a 10-year age advantage in this matchup. He's just going to be younger, hungrier, more powerful, I think. And I think he's just going to be able to muscle, out youth a Muslim Salikhov in 2025. So both these guys are, fairly well rounded. I think that Carlos Leal is going to bring more, just brute force to the table here. And with the 10-year, age difference with Muslim Salikhov being 41 years old, I don't think that's something he can handle. But at the same time, Salikhov, very skilled fighter. And, at minus 470 for Leal, definitely not a spot that I'm excited to play. So probably not going to be playing this fight, but Leal will still have to be the pick. Now, next up, we got Bryce Mitchell versus Said Nurmagomedov. And I think this is a pretty tough fight to break down. Probably the closest fight on the card to break down. We got Bryce Mitchell going down a weight class to bantamweight. And this is going to be interesting because, I do think Letterman skill does apply. Said Nurmagomedov been fighting at bantamweight. And now you see Bryce Mitchell making the move from featherweight to bantamweight after a couple tough losses at featherweight. Now, Bryce Mitchell, 3 losses in his career, but they have been to extremely high-level fighters. We have Jean Silva, who's obviously surging in the division. Josh Emmett, scary knockout. We know what Josh Emmett can do. And then, obviously, Ilya Topuria, the pound-for-pound best fighter on planet Earth right now. So, Bryce Mitchell, a couple tough losses in the featherweight division, in the rankings, now coming down to bantamweight, fighting Said Nurmagomedov, man. And this is another fight where it's interesting because the fight is in the UAE. So, if this does go to the decision and it is close, someone with the credentials of a Said Nurmagomedov being his last name will probably be favored to a Bryce Mitchell. That is something to note. And then just in general, I think that, Bryce Mitchell, obviously he's going to want to get this fight to the ground. Lands about 2 significant strikes a minute. Doesn't really do much work on the feet. He's going straight to the grappling every single fight. And when he can't get to the grappling, he definitely does struggle. His grappling is obviously really good, but we saw him struggle against John Silva. We saw him struggle. Josh Emmett, struggling to enter the pocket there, and Josh Emmett just goes in there, big overhand, puts him to sleep. Said Nurmagomedov is actually a really good striker on the outside. Obviously, you're going to read his last name and think he is a pure wrestler, but no, he's more of a striker than he is a wrestler. He is well-rounded, though. He can work on the ground as needed, but in general, he's a pretty good striker, especially from the outside. And I think that he's going to want to stay on the outside as Bryce Mitchell comes in. He can be taken down a little bit, but I don't know. I struggle to see Said Nurmagomedov being held down for 2 out of these 3 rounds. I struggle to see him get submitted in this fight. I think that, over 3 rounds in a matchup where Nurmagomedov is the better striker, I think that he can stay upright and, tag Bryce Mitchell from the outside, defend a couple takedowns. Maybe he gets taken down early, but as the fight progresses, be better. You kind of moving off the takedowns, getting off the cage, things like that. Obviously, he's coming off a loss to Vinicius Oliveira, but we know what Vinicius Oliveira can do. And Oliveira was pressuring him pretty heavily on the feet, and Oliveira will throw big bombs standing up. But Bryce Mitchell, no real threat standing up. Majority of his threats going to be from the takedown. I think from a perspective of Bryce Mitchell being fairly one-dimensional here, I think Said Nurmagomedov can stick and move on him enough to get this one done. So I'm going to say Nurmagomedov by decision. I think this is one of the closer fights on the card. I mean, the odds definitely reflect that as it is basically a pick-em. So I'm going to go Nurmagomedov. Obviously, the hometown advantage also does play somewhat of a factor there. And let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Nikita Krylov versus Bogdan Guskov. And I'm going to go with Nikita Krylov to win this one. Krylov coming off that loss to Dominic Reyes, who did knock him out. And then we have Bogdan Guskov on a 3-fight win streak between Zach Pauga, Ryan Spann, and then Billy Elekana in the UFC. He debuted in the UFC against Volkan Ozdemir, who was a very tricky opponent to debut against, very highly skilled fighter, did lose in the first round there. And I think that, Guskov, I'm not sold that he's fixed his cardio issues. And obviously, Nikita Krylov, I think that he can be knocked out. And that is really the problem here, is that Nikita Krylov's chin can definitely be checked. It got checked against Reyes once again. That was his second knockout loss of his career. And Guskov obviously can put anyone away. But the thing is, he can put anyone away early. Nikita Krylov has been, a very inconsistent fighter when it comes to just fighting over the years. His last fight was 3 months ago against Dominic Reyes, but prior to that, he hadn't fought in in over 2 years. So now that he's a little bit more active, fought 3 months ago, now coming back here 3 months later, I think that a Nikita Krylov who's going to get into his rhythm, get into, a bit more of an active schedule is a Nikita Krylov who is very dangerous and is one that does beat a Bogdan Guskov. So early round one, if you're betting on the Krylov side here, you should be a little bit worried because Guskov can land something big. But I'm definitely not sold on Bogdan Guskov when it comes to his cardio. I think as this fight goes on between rounds 2 and 3, Krylov will prove to be the much more skilled, much better fighter. So I think that Krylov should hopefully survives that first round, doesn't get caught with anything big. If he does and he goes down, I won't be too surprised. But if he, loses his fight in the second, third, or by decision, then I will be surprised. So I'm going to pick Krylov. I think that as long as he survives the first, gets, Guskov a little bit tired, he can take over in this matchup. So Krylov's going to be the pick. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next, we got Almabayev versus Jose Ochoa. And, Almabayev, I think you're getting a pretty good line on him here. So that's always going to tell you that I'm picking to win this fight. Jose Ochoa, he's 8-1 very early in his mixed martial arts career and, has 2 fights in the UFC, loses to Loner Kavanagh in his debut, but obviously Loner Kavanagh, blue chip prospect, very hyped up. Then he goes out there and beats Cody Durden. So, I think that Jose Ochoa, obviously a win over Cody Durden is pretty big, especially in your second UFC fight and your first UFC win. Now he's fighting Almabayev, and Almabayev coming off that loss to Manel Kape, but I'm going to go with Almabayev to win here. I think that, Jose Ochoa, he's a shoot, box, Diego Lima fighter. And you know what you get there. You get an all-offense, very dangerous opponent that can, finish you on the ground, on the feet, anywhere. But they struggle a little bit with fight IQ. They struggle a little bit when it comes to the takedown defense and the pure wrestling. And that's exactly what Almabayev brings to the table. So I expect this to be a very boring fight. I expect a Jose Ochoa fight to normally be very fun unless his opponent is someone like an Almabayev, who I think is going to come in here, look back to get, into the win column, and he's going to just kind of ride out a 3-round grappling fest against Ochoa here. So I think Almabayev, by decision makes the most sense. I don't think he subs up Jose Ochoa. I think Jose Ochoa is probably the better submission artist of the two. Jose Ochoa is definitely better on the feet out of the two of these guys, but I do see Almabayev going wrestle heavy, and I think that, these shoot box Diego Lima fighters, they definitely do struggle with the takedown defense. So I'm going to go Almabayev by decision. Let's move on to the next matchup. Next fight is Shara Magomedov versus Marc-Andre Barriault, and I'm going to keep this one pretty short. We got Shara Magomedov as a massive favorite here, minus 650, and I think it does make sense. Marc-Andre is actually pretty trash. He's coming off that win to Bruno Silva, but dude, we know that Bruno Silva is just absolutely done with his MMA career on, 5 straight losses now. So I don't put really any stock in the Bruno Silva win. And prior to that, losses to Chris Curtis, Joe Pyfer, Dustin Stoltzfus. And, all these fighters are actually pretty good. Even Dustin Stoltzfus, I think, is a very underrated fighter in general. But I think that in this matchup against Shara Magomedov, man, he's going to stick and move. He's going to do his thing. Obviously, he did lose to Michael Venom Page, but Michael Venom Page so far has proven that no one in the UFC can actually stand up and strike with him, at least from the fighters he has fought so far. So he's made, Ian Gary look stupid on the feet. Ian Gary had to resort to a bunch of grappling to beat Michael Venom Page. He obviously did to Kevin Holland. He did to Shara Magomedov. And, that's the way I see it. So Michael Venom Page, losing to him in a striking bout, it's not really too bad in my opinion. Shara in this fight should be able to stick and move on Marc-Andre. I don't think Andre will really have much there for him. I think that potentially Shara could even land something that knocks Marc-Andre Barriault out because I think his chin, to be honest, is not the best. So I'm going to go Shara Magomedov. Maybe I'll play a prop on this matchup though because I don't really like it at minus 650, but he should get it done. Let's move on to the next matchup. Up next in the co-main event, we got Petr Yan versus Marcus McGhee, and this is a pretty interesting co-main event. I definitely do like this matchup. Marcus McGhee trying to make a push for a title shot in the bantamweight division, but I think he does get stopped by Petr Yan. He's on a little bit of a run since he has joined the UFC. He's shown to have, pretty good skills. He's coming off that win to Jonathan Martinez where, he was definitely beating Martinez in the first 2 rounds. Drops the 3rd round as Martinez starts to light up his legs with that leg kick that Jonathan Martinez does throw extremely well. I just think that Petr Yan is a more dynamic striker than Marcus McGhee. I think that Marcus McGhee, is going to end up in a primarily striking match for 3 rounds against Petr Yan here. And I think that Petr Yan will mix it up more. I think he does have a solid low kick similar to Jonathan Martinez. I think he can chew up the leg of Marcus McGhee. I think on the feet, Petr Yan will light him up as the fight goes on. The only interesting thing here, obviously, is that Petr Yan, a little bit of a slow starter, it is a 3-round fight. Someone like Petr Yan has only been in 5-round fights as of late, if I'm not mistaken. I think his last, who knows, 6 or 7 or even more than that have been 5-round fights. So this is the first 3-rounder for Petr Yan, and he does start off a little bit slow. So if he does drop that first round, maybe it could look a little bit sweaty going into 2 and 3, having to win both. But overall, he is the better striker. He should get it done. Let's move on to the main event. And finally, in the main event, we got Robert Whittaker versus Reinier de Ridder. And this is a very interesting fight. Definitely means a lot for the title picture when it comes to the middleweight division. Obviously, RDR on a run since he's joined the UFC. Joins the UFC, beats Gerald Meerschaert in a very close, very weird, very GM3-esque fight. Then goes out there, beats Kevin Holland in the first round. Then goes out there and beats Bo Nickel. Obviously, Bo Nickel coming in with insane hype with that U.S. wrestling background. Now he's fighting Robert Whittaker, so big jumps in competition for RDR, but obviously RDR double champ in one championship, so he already has that pedigree coming in. Should not be fighting from the bottom of the rankings for sure. Now, Robert Whittaker is a very interesting opponent, really hard to break down. For a very long time, the second best middleweight on the planet, very clearly. He's coming off that loss to Khamzat Chimaev, where Chimaev just absolutely goes out there, gets him to the ground, holds him down, takes his back, and then we all saw the way, Chimaev just kind of broke his jaw in that fight. Now he's fighting RDR, who obviously no one has really shown to have similar aggression when it comes to wrestling as a Khamzat Chimaev, but RDR does pose a very similar threat to Robert Whittaker. And the thing I see with Robert Whittaker is just the fact that while he does have good takedown defense, and if you do break this fight from a very X's and O's type of standpoint, where it's like Robert Whittaker has good takedown defense and RDR will probably have to get this fight to the ground to do work with Whittaker, I think that I can see why people want to lean on the Robert Whittaker side when you do break it down from X's and O's. But I think if you look a little bit deeper, you just see that Robert Whittaker, it's in the fights that he is pressured for, he's kind of being pressured on, that his opponent is moving forward, that his opponent is, making him work a lot, like the DDP fight, where, you just don't know DDP's next move. In all those fights, you see Robert Whittaker start to struggle a little bit. That's where he does seem to do, drop fights, drop rounds in that scenario. So I think that RDR, I don't know, RDR is similar to a DDP type of opponent where he's just a little bit sloppy, but he gets it done. And he seems very large for the division at 6'4". He seems to, overpower people in the division like he did with Bo Nickel. I think that at this point in Robert Whittaker's career, I think someone coming in there to just purely outmuscle him, I can see Robert Whittaker losing that way. Technique-wise, skill-wise, Robert Whittaker is definitely the more skilled fighter here. But I think from a brute force perspective, that's exactly the threat that RDR poses. And I think that's exactly the threat that someone like Robert Whittaker will succumb to at this point in his career. So I'm going to go with RDR. A long-winded way of saying I think he's just going to brute force and DDP-esque his way into a win here. I think he's just going to kind of walk forward, get Whittaker up against the fence, just keep kind of working till he gets him to the ground and eventually lock up a sub. That's what I see happening to Whittaker in this matchup. If it goes late, it could be close. Definitely 5 rounds. If Whittaker can start defending some takedowns, getting some confidence in there, fighting a decent fight on the feet, I think that he can definitely do work. But I'm going to have to go with RDR here. I think he does get him down, and I think he does find the submission. Thank you guys for tuning in for the full card predictions for UFC Abu Dhabi. Like I said, at UFC 318 last week, we went 9 for 14, which in comparison was actually really good against a bunch of other channels that do post predictions. So if you do like what we're doing here, if you do like the way we break down fights, definitely check out betkopicks.com to access our bets every week for $20 a month. It does really help support the channel as well. So check that out if that's something you do want to check out. And in general, good luck to everyone this week at UFC Abu Dhabi. And I will see you guys for next week's card.